thanks everybody for being here, all of the attendees for showing up. We had a lot of people register for this event, which is really exciting. Thank you very much for the panelists who showed up, for coming here and answering everybody's questions. And I think with that, I'm gonna stop talking and let panelists introduce themselves. I can just like shout out your names in the order you are on my screen if that would be helpful. So in that case, Erica, you are first.
Sounds good. Thanks for the invite. Happy to be here. My name is Erica Bouchor, and my specialty is plant physiology and hydraulics. But I've transitioned into agronomy over the last few years as I've settled into my career at USDA. So for the last 5 years, I've been running an agronomy program at the USDA ARS National Peanut Research Laboratory in South Georgia. And my research is all applied and heavily influenced and constantly in dialogue with farmers and stakeholders in the peanut industry. Right now, looking at the effects of climate change on yield, irrigation management, and stuff like that. And I will mention too, right now I'm in a little transitionary kind of phase. I was recently promoted and relocated up to North Carolina to join the NC State peanut team up here. And they've decided to let me finish my PhD for free while working full time. So one thing that I think makes me different from some of the other panelists is that I do not have my PhD. I was in graduate school for it, and I decided halfway through that it wasn't financially lucrative, and I didn't really need it to get where I wanted to be in my career. And I said that, if there ever was a time where it did become financially lucrative, then I would do it. And so this is the time for me now where USDA is paying for it, and my work here just counts as dissertation work. So yeah.
Great, thank you. All right, I think next on my screen is Mary Williams. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi there, everyone. I'm Mary Williams. I got my PhD in 1991 in plant molecular biology, and I did a postdoc in plant developmental biology at Berkeley. And then I took a faculty position. So I know this is outside academia, but I'm currently outside academia. So I was a faculty member at a primarily undergraduate institution called Harvey Mudd College, if you've heard of it, in Southern California, from 1995 to 2009. And then I had a career transition because I came to Scotland on my sabbatical and I decided to stay. So suddenly at the age of 45, I had to find a new job. So I'll talk a little bit about that. But I work for a professional society, the American Society of Plant Biologists, very similar to BSA, except we tend to work on smaller molecules. And I do a lot of the things I did when I was teaching. I work with early career people. I know Nathan because one of our programs is the Plantae Fellows program, and nice to see you again. I work with the features editors. I work with 2 journals, the Plant Cell and Plant Physiology. So I do a lot of mentoring. I do a lot of writing. I do a lot of editing, and I love what I do, and I'm happy to talk more about it with you later on.
Thank you. All right, so next is going to be Emily. Fine.
Hey everyone, I am Emily Sessa. I'm the director of the herbarium at the New York Botanical Garden. And I had a pretty straightforward, normal track in academia for a long time. So got a PhD, did a postdoc, joined the University of Florida biology department as a faculty member. And I was there for about 9 years before leaving there and moving to New York Botanical Garden in 2022. So just a few years ago. So I can speak more to kind of like a later career transition from academia to academia adjacent, which is how I think of NYBG. But if folks have questions about careers and collections, obviously I work in a collection, I work at a not-for-profit botanical garden. So if people have interest in that area, I can try to speak to that a little bit as well. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm happy that we have a couple of people who have kind of made that transition because I know that's a thing that a lot of people asked about in our survey leading up to this. All right, so last we have Nathan. Introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hey everybody, I'm Nathan Sintomadonic. I just finished my PhD last year in plant biology from Cornell University, and I started immediately at a local startup here called Zymtronics Catalytic Systems. And it's focused on the manufacturing of cell-free biological products. So right now, I work on the ag side of things, and we have 2 products that we're developing, which is a biofungicide with a new mode of action, and also what we're calling a bioenhanced herbicide, which basically increases the efficacy of current herbicide chemistries, but reduces the overall input of the actives that are involved. And so I think in terms of things I can speak to is that transition from grad school straight into sort of a startup world. I also did an internship while I was in grad school, so I can speak to that. But just broadly on a day-to-day basis, I kind of do three things, which are product development, which translates into like the things most academic scientists think about, which is lab and field experiments to understand our product mode of action. I also look at data analysis and how we manage our data. So integrating all of our data into certain databases. And then lastly, translating some of the technical results that we generate into key metrics that can be used for fundraising purposes or in marketing materials. So I know there's some questions about science communication, and I think there's a lot of different ways that can look, right? So I think that might be something I can speak to as well. So thanks for having me.
All right. Yeah, thanks everybody for attending. And so I think that I have a couple of questions that I kind of just want to ask everybody that I think you'll all probably have slightly different outlooks on, based on like the current position you're in and how you got there. Which is just how did you find your job? Both, how did you actually find the job? Did you find it on a job board? Did you find it through an internship? Um, and how did you kind of decide that this is what you wanted to do? And what did sort of the beginning of that look like, I guess, starting a job outside of academia? And we can just go in the same order, I suppose, if Erica doesn't mind starting again.
Sure. So for me, when I was in graduate school and I was deciding I wanted to master's out, I didn't want to finish my PhD. I knew I really wanted to get into federal service because I wanted to really do science that I thought was meaningful. And so the first way that you get in, well, the main way that you get into federal service is through usajobs.com. That's the main job board, and that has all the job listings for every single bureau. So I did what everybody else did, and unfortunately, it's the way that it still is that I just applied to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of technician positions. And so make a profile, put your keywords in for the things that you're interested in, but I would also say, keep an open mind. So I was first hired by USGS, where I worked for 6 months doing some tree surveys. And then I was like, okay, this is cool, not my thing. Then I worked for the BLM as a rangeland ecologist for 6 months, also like, all right, a little better, but not there. And then I finally got into USDA and I was like, okay, this is my final landing spot. So for getting into federal service, and even if you want to work for state governments, the state job boards and USA Jobs are the kind of main portal that you need to focus on for applying, and just keep applying to hundreds and hundreds of positions.
I went ahead and dropped the link to USA Jobs in the chat in case anybody wants to take a look at it. All right, so Mary, you're up
So
next.
I guess my take home message would be for everyone here to get involved actively in a professional society like BSA or ASPB or whichever your professional society of interest is, because I had been the chair of the ASPB Education Committee while I was a faculty member. And when I was on my sabbatical, I was approached by the editor-in-chief of the Plant Cell, who wanted to develop the Teaching Tools in Plant Biology program. And at that time, I wasn't really thinking about leaving my job. So, we sort of talked about it, what it would look like and all this. And then 6 months later, when I was actually looking like, what would I do if I didn't go back to California? I said, oh my God, that would be the perfect job for me. So basically, I had a conversation with her. I did have to interview, but I think it was sort of an easy choice because I'd already consulted on the project. And again, if I hadn't been, engaged in that and had those personal contacts, which entirely came from membership and then being, asked to serve on a committee, like I would never have gotten this job. The other thing I did is when I was sort of starting to imagine this, I made a list of all the things I did and didn't like about my current job, or my, at the time current job. And that was really informative because I was offered a position, running the sequencing facility. And I thought, for about 30 seconds. And I said, that's totally not what I want to do. I want to be actively involved in science and communicating science and at the forefront of science. And I love going to conferences. So it turned out it was a great job for me, but personal connections and professional societies.
I think I'm next.
I think you are.
So I found my current position through another plug for societies here, professional society job boards. For me, it was a little bit of they kind of came to me, and I also was aware of the position. But all the professional society job boards are fantastic resources. So the Botanical Society of America, ASPT, and then for folks who might be interested in collections careers, there's the Society of Herbarium Curators, and then there are other sites that are sort of aggregators for the natural history collections communities. So I would suggest looking, keep an eye on those. But then institutions also have very well organized employment pages. So like New York Botanical Garden, for example, has, if you just like Google NYBG jobs, you'll find the page that has all of the jobs at the institution listed. And that can be really interesting because at a place like NYBG, it's everything from horticulture to education to science and collections. And so that's actually been kind of like eye-opening for me, that sometimes I'm looking at that page just to make sure that the listings for jobs in our area are correct, for example. But then we'll be like, oh wow, there's a horticulture position open. I wonder what that would be like. So I think if you find institutions that you're interested in, keeping an eye on those institutions' job boards, and maybe keeping an open mind about positions that come up, because there could be something really interesting that is not, something that you would have thought of, or that could be an entry position that could eventually lead you to somewhere else in that organization.
Is it me? I think. Yep.
Good turn.
Okay. Yeah. So the question is basically how we got our current position, and feedback on that, and how we got there. Basically, is that a good summary? Just want to make sure.
You have any advice for people looking for jobs, and how you found your job, etc.?
Yeah. So my job was basically found through networking. Like the first or second year in my PhD, I used to go swimming at the pool on campus, and I was shared a swim lane with the CEO of the startup that I currently work at. Now, we connected on LinkedIn then, and I, just because we were talking about science, and I didn't think anything would come of it. And so that was like my first year. And then in my fourth and fifth year of my PhD, I took 6 years. I realized that, I think I wanted to leave academia. And so I started to think about ways to get experience in industry. But I didn't want to do or apply for summer internships where I'd have to leave Ithaca and travel somewhere for the summer. So I thought, I wonder if I could reach out to this local startup company. So I reached out to the CEO, and I was able to find a way to do an internship just locally between my fifth and sixth year. And then, so it was kind of like a 3-month interview with this company, essentially, and just kept in contact. And so that's a very specific example, but I would say the broad thing to take away from that is personal, like professional networking. So I've used LinkedIn a lot, and if you're going into industry, it is used quite a bit. So what I would say is using some of those search functions in there to look within your personal network, any sort of connection you have with people, if you're from the same state, if you have the same sort of academic background and they're working at a company that you're interested in, reaching out and connecting with a purpose, saying, hey, I really wanted to connect with you because I saw you work at this company, and we both went to the same university, or we're both from California or Ohio or something like that. And do you have 30 minutes to sit down? And, I think that allows you to really get feedback from them on what their position is like, the structure of different organizations. And then, if you are interested in working for that company, your face will be in their mind, when they're thinking about that, or when you reach out again, when an opportunity comes up. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. Yeah.
No, I think that answers the question well. I was going to ask about networking, but I feel like a lot of you kind of covered that in your response already, which is nice. So a lot of people are interested. I think we have a lot of people here who are either just starting grad school or maybe haven't started grad school yet. And so a lot of people are interested in how important is it to have a PhD, and what things you might have learned during grad school that kind of were specifically applicable to the position that you have now, right? So how important do you think that getting that PhD was to getting a degree, or sorry, to getting a job outside of academia, and maybe how that affected your opportunities, right? The kind of jobs you were applying for. I don't know if we want to go in order again or if people just want to jump in. I don't know. I don't know what's better. It's my first time hosting a panel.
Let's start again since I do not have a PhD.
Great.
So my opinion on PhD or not, it's personal, and a lot of people, depending on where you want to go with how you see your career trajectory. So for me, knowing that I wanted to go into federal service, knowing that I personally never wanted to be a PI or being in charge of the lab, that I would be a really good number two, and that I really loved research. Um, the financial calculation of staying in grad school on a stipend and then postdoc money, it just didn't work out. So if you actually talk to people at the technician level in all of the federal bureaus, most of us do not actually have PhDs. So I would say federal and state service, it's actually more common to find technicians, research assistants, and even lab managers without PhDs. This is speaking from the last 5 years. The climate is changing a little bit now with the job market kind of being saturated with PhDs. So sometimes you run the risk of maybe having to compete with somebody who has a PhD who just wants a job. And so that's kind of something that you have to think about, is a trade-off that's up and coming. But as far as getting your foot in the door and becoming a technician, starting off as an intern, being a lab manager, a lab assistant, having a PhD is definitely, not a necessity. And so yeah, that's something to consider too. Just picking up maybe practical skills. Grad school was great for me in learning how to design an experiment, how to run a laboratory setting efficiently, how to organize and structure papers and reports. So graduate school definitely taught me a lot of skills that I use every day. And so for me, stopping at the master's level was perfect. But like I said, the PhD was not necessary to kind of cap out where I wanted to be at.
I can talk a little bit about the world of scientific publications, since that's basically where I am now. In most society journals, like the Botanical Society journals, the ASPB journals, their editorial board is mostly practicing PIs. And then, a small number of people like me have a job maybe as features editor, where we highlight the work, that's published in the main part of the journal. So I'm what we call a front matter editor. So I write in and edit these special, like, this is a cool paper, you should read it things. And that does require that I have like a broad knowledge, and a specialist knowledge of the discipline. But there's also there's also positions within the publishing world that don't require a PhD. And so I know a few people who've taken a master's degree, or, left even as a bachelor, and known they were interested in this field and moved into that. And again, there's so many different journals. And if you're a plant biologist, you're a little bit limited, because we don't have a whole lot of plant biology journals. And the big journals like Cell, for example, like, they don't get a lot of plant biology papers. But so if you're earlier in your career and you're not, already committed to the plant biology thing, it's probably a little easier to get a job, because there's more journals that might be interested in you. And then there you can either start at the very bottom rung and sort of commission papers and stuff, but work your way up. Or there are also master's degrees, and I don't know exactly what they're called, but they're things that help train you to be a sort of journal editor. And again, that would be something you might want to look into if you're interested. It is a really fun career. I can definitely endorse that.
So I think, speaking from kind of a collections perspective, I would say it depends on the type of position in collections that you might be interested in. So, I mean, I would say, to be honest, the only positions in collections that really would expect you to have a PhD or require a PhD would be director level positions, like the one that I have. But there's one other person on my staff in the herbarium who does have a PhD, but then nobody else does. So it's not necessary, it's not required or expected. If you're interested in, curatorial or collections management positions, or increasingly we are looking for data coordination, people with data expertise to play data coordinator roles. So I think that's a skill that's important and increasingly important everywhere, is ability to work with data, analyze data, some coding ability, some familiarity with AI is going to be necessary, or at least a bonus in a lot of careers. And even for us in collections, we're wading into the AI field as well. So in terms of, that's definitely not a skill I got in graduate school, but it's a skill that's going to become increasingly useful if you have it. Yeah, so I think probably for most collections careers, a master's or bachelor's is probably sufficient. But if you do have your heart set on being like the director of a herbarium or the director of a collection, the majority of those positions in the U.S. at least are going to be university collections, and those do typically tend to be faculty positions. So it's pretty common that you would be, your assistant professor of biology could have director of the herbarium at that university as a component of that job. And so in that case, then obviously, it's fundamentally a faculty position. But there might be other positions in those collections, and frequently there are, where the PhD would not be necessary. And there definitely are fields where, the PhD could be looked down on, where it's kind of overkill if it's not needed for the job that you're looking for. So one piece of advice that I have would be and this is another plug for LinkedIn, which like it was surprising to me moving from academia to the real world, as I affectionately call it, where I find myself now, that like LinkedIn is a real thing. In academia, I never used it. I didn't really know what it was for, but it's definitely, I saw all of us nodding actually when Nathan was saying that. So yeah, like we all appreciate that LinkedIn is a real thing now. And one thing that LinkedIn can be very useful for is find people who have positions that you're interested in and see what their backgrounds are. This was a piece of advice that was given to me very early in my career, was like, look at the people who you think you would want to be and try to figure out what their CV looked like when you were kind of at the same stage, and try to see then like use their CV, and if you can track what it looked like and how it changed through the years, to try to, you could plot out what your, might be a successful path to having a career that looks the same way that that person's career did. And LinkedIn is really great for that. So you could either find an organization that you're interested in working at and then start to look and see, like, is everybody associated with that institution a PhD? Okay, that tells you something. And if they're not, then that also tells you something. So you could either find institutions you're interested in, find, individual, if you meet someone and you're like, wow, your career sounds really amazing, you could go stalk them a little bit on LinkedIn and see what their path has looked like. And that the networking feature on LinkedIn is really great, because you can see all the other people who work at that institution. You can see people's connections to each other. So you can trawl it for a lot of really useful information and finding out what people's pathways have been to get to different types of positions. So I definitely recommend that.
Yeah, that's great. Just to echo that. And yeah, LinkedIn has kind of become, it can be kind of like an eye-rolly thing when you have to use it, but it is, everyone's using it for that reason, because they want to connect. So I would just echo, the importance of that, and just, connecting even with, people just in your program to get started. But to answer the broad question, do you need a PhD for careers outside of academia? I would say no. So for many positions, oftentimes, even when I've been looking, they substitute experience for a degree. Like they'll say a bachelor's plus X number of years for experience, master's, and then PhD plus this many years. So I think, it depends on the job title and what you're looking for. If you're looking for a highly technical position in industry, like you want to, be doing metabolomics for Corteva or something, they're going to be looking for and running that program. You're going to need to probably have a PhD. But I would say it's not necessary. It just depends on the types of positions you want to occupy in industry. So, if you're thinking about grad school, I wouldn't necessarily recommend starting a PhD because you want to work in industry. But if there are positions within industry that you want to get to that require a PhD, then yes. I would say, the PhD can translate a lot in industry, but there's a lot of things that are not taught in grad school that are really important for industry and product development. Thinking about marketing, sales, even how you design experiments. Like, what's the purpose of what you're designing the experiment for? Are we trying to figure something out for like a farmer, or like just pure knowledge sake? So, when you're, so what I'm saying is those things can be learned through working in industry, and not necessarily come from, receiving a PhD. I would say on that same note, if you don't need a PhD, what do you need? And I think, or what do you want to focus on? It's the translatable skills, which are like writing, critical thinking, speaking, talking to different groups of people. And I think that goes a long way. And even with a PhD, when I've applied to jobs and when I've interviewed, I'm always still trying to take the specifics of my PhD and like kind of get out of it. What are the broad features of that? Like, what did I learn? What can I translate? Because, I worked on plant membrane transporters, and most jobs in industry do not care about plant membrane transporters, but like, what did I learn through that process? And I think, speaking of that, it's, getting a PhD, you do get highly specialized knowledge that I think kind of sharpens your ability for critique of certain approaches and certain ways of thinking about a certain topic. I still work in plants, so I think that has helped me quite a bit. Experimental design, a lot of trial and error. That's a lot of what the PhD is a lot of things don't work, so you start to figure out what does from what doesn't. And then again, just maybe translating knowledge or making connections, because as part of the PhD, you try to get a broad background in the plant sciences as well. But overall, I wouldn't say you need a PhD to work in industry. But again, echoing what Emily said is, use LinkedIn, see what positions are out there. There's a lot of positions that I was not aware of were even titles for positions and things like that. So really educating yourself on what's out there, because I think sometimes for me, when I was transitioning out, it's like, oh, if I'm not going to be a PI, like, what is there even for me? And there's like really cool, interesting roles that I didn't even know were there. I didn't know the title of them because industry has its own lingo for how it talks about things. So that's another really good plug for LinkedIn and professional networking. So I think I'll leave that there.
The next question I think is probably mostly going to be for Mary and Emily. I don't know if the other two of you participated in any hiring, but if you've participated in hiring at all, what part of the resume do you think is most important, and what kind of skills and things do you think that people should focus on putting on there if they're looking to kind of move outside of academia?
Oh, I wanted to follow up on something Nathan said anyway, which is exactly this. What did I get out of it? And I think that is so important to include in a job application. Don't just list, I was on the, inviting the seminar speaker team when I was a PhD student. Like, what did you get out of it, right? I learned how to organize. I learned how to blah, blah, blah. And I think, as you said, and Nathan said, a PhD is a very like straight line to a faculty position, but you need to show that you've gone beyond that and you have been acquiring as much breadth as you can. And again, I think data management skills for every job, right? Demonstrating somehow, whether you took a course, did a certificate or whatever. And I think increasingly that's becoming inevitable, right? But I think it's important. But again, like, what did you get out of this experience? Don't just list experiences, but say how it made you a better candidate.
Yeah, I think I would add to that. Again, this is sort of specific to collections, but also more broadly, like what any experience that you have that is relevant is always going to be important. So like in the herbarium, you're going to be more likely to be offered a job with us if you have some experience working in a collection. But that could be any type of collection. It doesn't necessarily need to be a herbarium. So I think like, and we might, if somebody came to us with experience in some other type of collection, maybe we would favor them over someone who did have like herbarium experience specifically, if they had some collection of other skills, or if they could make a really great case for why the experience that they had prepared them really well for working with us in particular. So I think my point is like being creative about the experiences that you've had, and being really reflective about the experiences that you've had, and what your own strengths are. It can be hard to know what our own strengths are. I feel like I didn't appreciate my strengths until I was many years into a faculty position, and that was part of the reason that I ended up leaving, actually, was that I felt like my strengths were not being as fully used as they could be. And that was one of the reasons actually that I made the transition that I did. So I think getting back to kind of being reflective about your experiences, that also ties into familiarizing yourself with the organization that you're applying to. And this is like a very, basic, probably you've heard this before. It's a basic piece of advice that's often given when you're applying, and it sort of makes sense. But I think it's worth saying that, when you're interviewing with an institution, knowing something about them, whether it's a company or a society, like knowing what their mission is, knowing what their goals are. I was actually asked in my interview with the New York Botanical Garden, tell us what you know about the mission of NYBG. And I happened to have the website open in the background of the Zoom window with the mission. And I was like, okay, I'm going to quickly paraphrase. And they were amazed that I was so familiar with it. But, you know, doing that sort of work, like background work on them, and then thinking creatively and very reflectively about how you can make yourself attractive to them, and try to put yourself in the position of the person you're talking to. Like, what are their needs? What are they looking for? Like, are there things that you can perceive from looking at their social media posts or their website that are like, I see you guys have been working on this a lot, and actually I've got some experience in that area. And even if it's not directly related to the job that you're applying for, that might be the thing that sets you apart, that makes you a little bit different. So I would really recommend that. And then I think another thing, I agree with everything that's already been said, but just to add that, this is, again, it's another like trope, but being able to demonstrate that you can work both independently and collaboratively is really important. So if there are specific things that you can point to where you like started and executed a project entirely on your own, and then another example where you worked really well with the team, either as a member of the team or as a leader of a team, I can't think of any job that doesn't require both of those things. And so if you can think of ways to show how you're really good at both of those things, working on your own and working as part of a team, like succinct examples that you can demonstrate, and if it's in the context of what you're applying for, even better. So I think that's what I would add when it comes to things like when looking at hiring.
Sort of a follow-up question. Sorry, I think that Erica and Nathan can probably answer is like, what sort of non-academic skills do you think are important, right? Like we talk a lot about building these skills during a PhD, but are there things that you do outside of school that you think were important in getting your current position, or maybe now looking back that you wish you had done?
Well, I just want to hop in really quick. I totally agree with what Mary and Emily had said about kind of bringing more personality and, tailoring that part of your identity to your resume. One thing that I want to say that is very specific to USA jobs, if you're looking to get into any federal agency, is that you need to get your application to human hands. And a lot of people don't know, and it's not widely publicized, but USA Jobs uses algorithms and AI to sort through thousands of applications. So just because you have like really great resume and a really great cover letter doesn't mean it's ever going to make it to human hands. So what I tell people, I work in a mentoring program that helps undergraduates apply for federal positions. I tell them whenever you're looking at the job position, you want to pull out keywords. So if it says, managing chemical inventory, stuff like that, and you worked in a lab or have experience like that, I would never say like copy paste a job position into your resume, but it is important for USA Jobs and other federal sites that you get past those AI bots. And the way to do that is to make each application very specific to kind of the keywords that they're looking for. And then once you make it through the AI, which, about 10% of applications actually make it through, then you can send in your nice fancy, cover letter and have more of a human connection. But yeah, getting through those algorithms can be tough at first if you're not used to it.
Yeah, so let me think. Skills outside of work. I'm just gonna go back and hammer, like translatable skills again, because I think, outside of like the classroom, like what sort of things are going to be important for a job, and that's going to be getting along with others, right? So I was putting some notes while other people were talking. So it's like the 3 C's, right? Collaboration, communication, and connection. So you gotta collaborate and get along with others in any job. So any way you can demonstrate that, whether you've, mentored someone in your lab, taught them like a new protocol or something, that would be great. Communication, how can, as we're talking about here, communication, how do you talk about your research? Is there like a way that you can practice talking about your research? Like going to conferences is a great way to think about that, but maybe if you're looking at certain jobs, what's the industry lingo and how can you translate what you've been doing into what they're talking about? So I think it's often an instinct to tell people the very technical details of your research project. Like, I worked on all these transporters and did all these things, but it's like, at the end of the day, I'm really interested in agriculture. And I believe that by like fine tuning how plants take up nutrients, we can, help use our resources better, right? Like something like that. So practicing your communication for diverse audiences, which means, for academics, for, anybody you run into, like your elevator talk, and then like, someone at industry, like what are they interested in? What can you tell them that would excite them? And then I guess it goes along with communication, but connection. So networking. So really use LinkedIn, reach out. And like, I think I'm going to just say it again, like connect with people on LinkedIn, but in part of that, like connecting, asking to set up like a 15-minute Zoom conversation, or LinkedIn has a video chat too, and just get comfortable like meeting new people and learning what they do and asking questions about that and sharing with them what you do and what you're interested in. I think that takes some of the pressure off of it when you get an interview or you're talking to someone that you're hoping will hire you, is that you've practiced that and you've gotten some feedback. So yeah.
All right, let's see. We have far more questions than time at this point, and I'm hoping at the end to be able to open it up to people if there's anything we didn't get to that you really wanted to hear, or if you've had new questions after listening to everybody talk. Maybe start putting those in the chat, and I'll try to work through them in like the last 10 minutes or so. I think this one's kind of fun, so I want to ask, because a couple of people actually asked it in our survey. How do you incorporate art or creativity into your job? Like, are you just sitting at a computer all day going through spreadsheets, or do you get to do creative things sometimes? And yeah, what does that look like for your position?
Well, my first 8 years working at the ASPB, I was doing the teaching tools in plant biology, and each of those has 100 slides per topic. And so I did a lot of, creativity in terms of figuring out like what do I want to say, and then finding images, making images. My husband's a photographer, so he donated a lot of images. I say, I need a picture of Gunner. You go to the Botanic Garden, take a picture, bring it back. Okay, cool. And I loved that. I mean, I just love. I'm a visual person. You might tell from behind me, right? And I love having a picture that gets the point across. And then you can have a few words and stuff. And then even now, I don't do that anymore, but I promote science using social media and finding an image or even making an image that will get people's attention so that they'll click on the link. I think that's really engaging and fun. And then, of course, the writing, writing these summaries we write of research articles. It's not just, copying and pasting the abstract. You're trying to make it interesting and engaging. So something that goes into more of a big picture idea than just sort of the abstract, which can be kind of dull. And how do I get someone who's maybe an ecophysiologist interested in this metabolic pathway, right? How do I connect that? And again, writing and teaching and communicating is very creative and fun. And it's the thing that I really enjoy.
I mean, I can.
Erica, do you want to go ahead? You looked like you were going to say something before. Go ahead.
So for me, my creativity comes with the part of science communication that I do with part of my job. So working with farmers in the community and extension events, and that is also like 4-H and little kids. And so the creative fun part of my job is making materials for those events. So we'll grow a bunch of peanut plants and then we'll pull them out of the ground and cast them in resin. And so the kids can like hold up these resin casts of peanut plants and kind of they'll look around and say like, oh, that's a taproot. Like these are lateral meristems. Here's an apical meristem. So that's kind of the fun part, is the SciComm that comes after the research. You're working on the farm all season, but then how do you tell your audience what you learned? And so 4-H extension events and a lot of like citizen science opportunities are kind of where I get to be creative.
So I'm lucky that herbaria are inherently beautiful, and our specimens are inherently beautiful. So we do a lot. For me, I would say it's mostly outreach. So we do a lot of outreach, a lot of communication. I'll put in the chat. So we have a narrative storytelling platform through the herbarium called the Hand Lens, and so this is like an online engagement platform where my staff, when they come across specimens that interest them for whatever reason, whether it's aesthetics or the story behind the specimen, the collector, the location, whatever it might be, they can write a blog post about it. So some of them are super short, some of them are a little bit longer. That's one kind of avenue for creativity that my staff created long before I got there. But then, we do a lot of outreach events on the grounds of the New York Botanical Garden that we're always being asked to pull specimens for. So that's really fun to go into the herbarium and pull specimens. We give a lot of tours, so we have sets of specimens set aside that are particularly beautiful or interesting for historical reasons. Yeah, it's a whole range of interesting things that all center around the aesthetic and historical beauty of specimens. We'll be asked to do things like we've been making 3D specimens. This is kind of a cool thing that, like, we have a fabricator we've been working with where they look like normal specimens, but then when you look at them closely, they're actually 3D printed so that they're dimensional. So that's been a really cool project that we've done lately. And then the administration of the garden found out that we were doing this and actually just had us make one for a donor that they were honoring at an event a couple of weeks ago. So it turned into, like, it was this neat thing that we started doing as an outreach activity in the herbarium that then the administration of the institution was like, wow, that's really creative and interesting. And we want to use that for our engagement with our friends of the garden. So that was a fun example of a creative outlet that we had.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, I would not say what I do at work is art, but it is creative, right? So we're working for a company. It's a small company, which I think, just to plug as well, if you're someone looking to get experience, smaller startups, I mean, every company varies, right? So you want to do your research, but I've found the ability to have a lot of like leeway in what I do in terms of just experimental design, which is really cool. Some people think, like, when you go into industry, somebody in a suit is telling you do these experiments. If, a lot of the time, if they're wearing the suit, they might not have the science background. And so I found that a lot of the time, and this might help with having a PhD, is they'll defer to me and say, what do we need to do here? We want to answer these commercial questions. Like, I'll let you figure out on the other end, like, what to do. So there's that. And again, it's not art, but I would say somewhere between like 30 to 50% of my time, depending on the week, goes to sort of translating what we're doing in the lab or in the field to like these key metrics that our fundraising staff can use when they go and talk to venture capital or look for commercial partners. And then so we really try to tailor the story around, like, what are the needs of the farmers, and what is our product, or what are our products actually doing? So we think a lot about framing and like message design. And so there's a lot of really interesting stuff there that you do in school or in grad school when you're writing grants, like, right, you're trying to tailor your message to an audience. So you get to, we want a certain outcome, but the way we get there, we get to use our creativity. It's not going in a museum anywhere, but I found that I do enjoy that level of trial and error, and really still the ability to learn and sort of iterate on different things at work. So
we have our first question in the chat that actually sort of echoes one of the other questions that we got quite a bit about science communication specifically. So you can read the question in the chat, and then we also had questions that were submitted to registration about sort of how difficult it is to find jobs in science communication and how you would prepare for that. And then what sort of organizations you might approach, right? What kind of organizations have need for these science communicators if you were looking for that kind of job?
I'm happy to jump on that one if other panelists are okay with that. I would suggest that folks also think, if you're interested in science communication, think beyond just like the science arm of an institution. Like, think about the marketing and communications. Like, we have a whole marketing and communications department at New York Botanical Garden. So we have a scientific illustrator who she's not she works often with our folks, but she's basically contractual. So we don't have like a staff position that's dedicated to scientific illustration, for example, but definitely there are opportunities for contract freelance based work essentially. But there might be more positions that would be in either exhibitions or marketing or branding or whatever the office would be at or the department would be at the institution that you're looking at. So I would say that for those types of positions, think beyond like just science, because it might be that those sorts of positions actually would be based in other parts of the institution. And I think, thinking back to like talking earlier about skills and, if there are courses that you can take that are marketing courses or branding courses, those are definitely things that most institutions are interested in. And if that's something that you have a little bit of experience with, if you are an artist, or if like kind of broadening your toolkit to be that sort of thing of like, you can create art, but you could also, like, if you've got some web experience, that you could bring web design or graphic design or branding and marketing, those sorts of things as well. You might be able to present yourself as a package that's different than somebody who has maybe a narrower skill set, or is looking, just at like they want to be in the science part of the organization.
I could add something on that with science communication. I mean, I think there's two sides of it, right? If you're thinking more of like the visual side of communication, like graphics, or there's also like the, speaking, right? Like talking to people, if you really like that, I like doing that. So, there are, I would say, in industry, from what I've seen, because I'm on LinkedIn a lot now looking at stuff, just, job market is what it is. You always keep an eye out, but marketing would be, a thing to think about. I know you might have preconceptions about what marketing is, but, this is an opportunity, I think, to use LinkedIn to see what people's backgrounds are at different companies that you're interested in marketing, see how they got there. Usually to get into marketing, or, some sort of marketing in a scientific aspect, you need to have a background in science, right? You're not just coming from, like a business school or something. Like, you might learn skills at business school for marketing, but you need to have a solid background on your science and how you're talking about that. And then for speaking, like, you might consider some things that would fall under sales positions, right? So I think I'll give two examples here. So in industry, a lot of positions that would fall under sales but require science communication would be like a field application scientist. So a lot of companies, the ones that sell you your PCR machines, all your reagents, all these cool kits, a lot of the people that go around and help you troubleshoot a piece of equipment, or you call when you have an issue, are scientists, right? And so it's positions that have a technical background in the sciences but want to work with labs, both industry and academic, and help figure out what your experiment needs are, right? So they can help guide you in the right direction. So field application scientist. And then more on the so that's the sales. On the marketing end, a lot of the lingo for hiring is something like a field development manager. So you might be working, you might go out into the field, for instance, and, do like a fungicide trial or something, but you might also be meeting with like what they call like grower influencers. So like farmers that are really influential, and yeah, they're not on TikTok necessarily, but like people know, like, oh, if farmer X says this is good and they give it their thumbs up, like, we're going to do that. So, if you really want to interface with people, there's a lot of ways you can, use that science communication in industry, I think.
Also thinking about science communication, I have a bunch of friends who, started grad school and they love science and sustainability and the environment, but research really wasn't their thing. And so they got into policy. And so we actually work with a lot of policy consultants because we do the research and we write the reports and we have all the technical information. They take it and they kind of, make it more digestible, and then they bring it to NGOs and politicians and senators and congressmen who vote on the farm bill and stuff like that. So I think that's also like an alternative to think about too. Like, even if you're like, oh, I love, XYZ, I like ecology, nature, sustainability, whatever, but maybe like a hardcore research role isn't my thing. We always need good science communicators to kind of branch actual hardcore research with the policymakers, because senators and congressmen, they're not reading bio textbooks, or they're really not up to snuff where they should be, but they're making really important decisions that affect all of these areas. So that could be another kind of alternative way to look at communication as well.
Okay. I think there's a question specifically directed at Erica in the chat right now about sort of what kind of positions somebody should be applying for, maybe entry-level positions at USDA. But also if briefly other people want to mention, right, what an entry-level position maybe looks like in your field, particularly ones that maybe don't require PhDs. I know a lot of what we talked about, or how, these jobs don't necessarily require PhDs, might be nice to revisit for some people here.
Let's see. Okay, what should I start be applying for USDA? So USDA, and pretty much any other federal agency, like I said, Bureau of Land Management, USGS, National Park Service, all those good entry-level positions are all going to be labeled as biological science technician. So those can kind of change based on your specialty. So there's like biological science technician range, which is more ecology focused, biological science technician plants, which is me, who is like physiology and kind of ecophys, and then biological science tech microbiology. So there's kind of all these little subsets. So any technician position is good. If you're looking in the federal government, if you have a bachelor's, GS4 is the starting salary range that you should expect. If you have a master's, 5 to 8 is pretty good. And then if you have a PhD, you can expect to start 9 to 12. So yeah, anything technician. Research assistant is usually more internship based or seasonal in the government. But yeah, like I said, just type in those keywords in USA Jobs, and you can actually do like a save search too, and they'll email you on a weekly basis. I do that for LinkedIn. Like Nathan said, I'm still in the job market, still looking for those keywords, and I have emails sent to me every week. So setting one of those up for biological science technician on USA Jobs would be a good place to start.
I could add to that too. I had said a few positions just for the marketing stuff, but it depends. I'm still focused on like research positions here. So if that's what people are interested in industry, like yeah, technician, research associate, and maybe field biologist might be, depending on what companies you're looking at, those might be some sort of position names that would be, you wouldn't need a PhD for. But in industry, like my official title is scientist 1. So, and then, you get promoted to scientist 2, and then eventually you're senior scientist. And then there's like other things. So, but again, this is where I think really looking at like identifying companies you're interested in. If you're interested in like big companies, like big ag companies, they'll have a certain corporate structure that you can read about, and they have their own like, they're similar to like the GS levels almost, like, it's very hierarchical. And then, so it's going to change by company. So I would suggest, if you're like, I really want to work for Ginkgo Bioworks or whatever, really look at what their job titles are called. Because some companies now, they're like, oh, we have our cool own internal lingo for job titles. So again, I'm going to hammer it again, networking. That's where reaching out to people with whatever thread of connection you have with them is really helpful, and they can help you navigate those specifics for those job positions.
I would just add, in terms of like entry-level positions, and I think Nathan had mentioned earlier, internships. So that term can be used a little bit differently. Like at NYBG, we have interns in the herbarium who are actually like 6-month positions. So they're short term, but during that term, you're a full-time employee. It's, paid full-time. And so those are like, you're done at the end of your 6 months, but we have had people in those positions go off then and be hired by other herbaria because they can demonstrate that they've had this experience. So intern and internship can mean a lot of different things, but in general, that's always going to be really great experience. So if you can find a position like that, hopefully a paid position, definitely do it.
All right, I'm keeping my eye on the time. It is 12:57. So I'm going to put this Botany360 survey back in the chat. If you can fill it out, it's really helpful to people at BSA, again, for us tailoring these events. If we didn't get to people's questions, I'm really sorry. There were a ton of questions. Attendance was really good for this. It's encouraging. We'll have to have more of these events. And yeah, I just want to take a minute to thank everybody for coming. If there are any last minute things anyone wants to squeeze in our last 90 seconds of this Zoom interview, feel free. And otherwise, I'll stop recording around 1 and people can feel free to disperse. But thanks again, everybody, for coming, attendees and panelists. This went really well, and I'm only sorry we don't have more time to go through more questions.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. It was nice to be here.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Well,
Bye-bye. Thank you.
yeah. Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.